So in part one, listening to injured workers, really our aim here was to understand the main challenges that injured workers experience during their claim, how those things affect them. And really what we've tried to do is not go over that ground, because we've heard that a lot. We just felt we needed to give people that were participating in our project an opportunity to tell us about their experiences. But increasingly we've been directing them or asking them to try to think about solutions to those challenges. And that's been a tricky thing to do. Some people aren't in a position where they're able to think of solutions, or they don't understand the systems well enough to do that. So we've had to work pretty hard in some cases for that to occur. But we've got a list of pretty interesting things and some important areas or opportunities that I'll describe in a minute. So we've done this through that mixed methods program. We've surveyed, I think it was 553 injured workers and another group of about 50 or so key informants. We've had in-depth interviews. We've received stories and written submissions and letters and videos via our website. We've had innumerable formal and informal discussions with our lived experience advisors and with groups of other injured workers that through support networks and support groups and presentations and discussions with those groups online, some in person but mainly online. And then we're entering this phase now where we're actually just this morning we're organising our first solutions-focused workshop, which we're hoping will occur later in July. We're planning on having 3 of those focused on some very specific topics that we've identified as particular challenges for injured workers. And then towards the end of this year, we're going to run what are called preference surveys, where we ask larger groups of injured workers to tell us their preferences about the solutions that we identify in those workshops. And we will then try to represent those preferences in the computer models that we have almost finished developing. So a lot of work's been done here, but we have some more to go in part one. Some of the things that we have identified, I'll just give you a brief insight into some of the findings. When we ran the survey about a year ago now, a little over a year ago, of course the people that volunteered to participate are people who wanted to tell their story. And what we found was that we had recruited a group of people, most of whom reported a negative mental health impact of their involvement in workers' compensation. About 90 to 93% of the 553 people that we enrolled in this survey told us that the claims process had a negative impact on their mental health. And we also asked them about the nature of their experience in the workers' compensation system and whether it had been a negative one throughout, or if there'd been positive aspects to it, or if they found it sort of a neutral experience. And about half of those people told us that they had a persistent negative experience during their compensation claim, and the other half had a mix of things. Some of them had found it to be positive, quite a few of them were neutral. Some of them said it started really positive and then it descended into a negative one. A few people said the opposite, it started negative and it became positive. So what we've done statistically is look to see if we could differentiate between the things that were associated with a persistent negative experience all the way through your workers' compensation claim. And we ran a few sort of relatively sophisticated analyses and really found 3 key features that sort of were related to whether someone said, I had a negative experience all the way through. So workers who said they had had a negative engagement with their insurer, particularly early on, was 6.67 times more likely to report a persistent negative experience, adjusting for other things such as their age, their gender, their injury type and other things. And similarly, workers who had a negative engagement or interaction with their employer were more than 3 times more likely to report this negative experience throughout their claim. And then the other one was waiting a long time for claim approval. So workers who had waited a long time for approval were more than 4 times more likely to report a persistent experience throughout their claim. So these were the key things. So the insurers, the employers, and waiting for your claim to be approved were the things that came through very strongly as main challenges in our survey. We had a sort of some open-ended questions in the survey as well, where we sort of asked people about some solutions and the factors that affected their mental health. And we've just at the point where we have, we're completing a qualitative analysis of that text information. This is from about 227 workers involved in the survey, and we've identified a couple of main themes here. that there are some claims-related sources of stress, and you can see those listed here. So similar themes to what we heard in the other survey. So impersonal contact with claims managers, difficulty speaking with your employer about return to work, wait times for claim requests and liability determination, legitimacy being questioned, financial losses. Those are the sorts of things that workers report as sources of stress for them, very similar to what we heard in that study I mentioned earlier from colleague Genevieve Grant. And then the other theme was really about the impacts on those people, so the fallouts from injury and the loss of their pre-injury circumstances, which were about reduced health-related quality of life, concerns about the future employment, future financial stability, those sorts of things, and then negative impacts on their family and their social interactions as well as being the main impacts of these things. So what we're hearing in this group is very consistent with what we've heard for over a decade in studies of injured workers. We also asked them for some ideas about solutions, and what we've done so far with the solutions is to categorise them into 7 main categories here. And I'll just take you quickly through these. Don't have time to go through all of the individual solutions or examples of solutions that were suggested by our injured workers, but on the left you can see the main topics. So a solution to that feeling of uncertainty or being out of your depth at the beginning of a claim, one thing that came through very clearly was provision of clearer, plain language, more timely information. So for example, just a simple flowchart on what happens and when, and information on who they can contact about if they need support. And one thing that was mentioned by quite a few people was, if my claims manager is going to change, please give me some warning about that. The other sorts of themes here are just making the process simpler, streamlining the processes and symptoms, even things like just the number of boxes on forms that need to be filled out, or the amount of information that needs to be collected to ask to request a service or something. Just make those things simpler. Some behavioural things, acting with compassion and empathy and transparency, a request to consider the impacts on the worker beyond just their injury, so to take into consideration their home life, the impact on their family, to think a bit more carefully about how much support family members provide for people when they're injured and ill, and that maybe we need to support the carers as well as the injured people in order to help the injured people to get back to work. A few things on employers, pretty strong theme on from this group on keep ensuring that employers meet their obligations in the scheme and that they're accountable and that they have restorative processes within the workplace. Quite a lot of commentary about financials and workers addressing the financial stress that workers find themselves in when their income's reduced and they have extra expenses for treatment and those sorts of things. And then placing a bit more emphasis and trust on the workers' preferred treating health professionals and things like reducing the number of IMEs. So there's quite a long list of concrete solutions actually were presented to us when we asked injured workers about this. And a lot of these, some of them would require changes to legislation and things, but a lot of them can be implemented in practice without requiring large reforms to schemes.